Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 3 of my Industrial Revolution 3 playthrough. In this episode, we are going to use some steam assemblers to set up some basic automation. Enjoy! So, going through our menu to look at the other stuff that we researched, what we have access to are the steam assemblers and the small steam assemblers. And both of them are quite expensive. 70 copper for one steam assembler. Let's switch those to the back. At least the small one's cheaper, but they're still both quite expensive. But we have these transfer plates to easily fill up again. Oh, that crafting queue is so long to make so little. But that is what our next goal here is, to minimize the amount of handcrafting that we have to do to make anything. And we are going to have to start this minibus somewhere. Not sure where, but probably it's going to be basically right here. And you can see how tiny our range is. But I'm pretty sure all of this stuff is going to have to go. Man, that's so much trees all of a sudden. But having the robots makes it a lot easier, as slow as they are. It's a lot nicer than doing it by hand. Let's do a deconstruction planner, specifically for trees and rocks. They are quite slow though, so if you run away real fast, they will not be able to keep up. And there they are, filling up on the steam, which then is using the empty cells, causing them to be available to be placed back in to be filled up with steam again. It's a lot better if you have, say, 50 cells in your inventory rather than just a few, so you don't have to immediately recharge them. But the crafting time is so long that we can actually make a meaningful impact on this forest, while waiting for it to complete. Alright, since we're mostly done, we can turn off the roboport and let the robots come back in. And switch those cells out and have it immediately be filled in again. And the steam derrick is down to 58.4 steam a second, so it definitely takes a while before it starts to slow down. But here we go. We now have access to regular assemblers and the tiny ones. Both of them run on steam, but the regular assembler is a 3x3 and the small one is a 1x1. The regular assembler can make everything. It has no limits on what you can do with it. However, the small one here can only make certain base components. So in this case, it makes the copper plates, tin plates, stone bricks, wooden beams, both types of gears, both types of rods, and also copper rivets and copper pellets. And another reason why you don't want to bus a bunch of stuff, especially in the beginning of the game, but also especially throughout the game, is that why would you want to bus, say, copper gears when making copper gears is trivial, where one ingot goes in to make a plate and then one plate goes in to make a gear? You can do that anywhere. There's absolutely no reason for you to bus something like copper gears around. And that essentially applies to every single thing that one of these small assemblers can make. There's no point in busing any of this because you can just make it where you need to. So the only things you would want to consider to bus are the more complex intermediate parts. If we want to make pistons, we're going to need the bigger machine, as well as small copper frames, large copper frames, basic motors, basic rotor units, and basic engines. These are all things that we want, because if you look at, like, the mining drill, it uses copper pistons, a basic engine, and a large copper frame. And it makes sense what uses what. Like, things that have motors in them generally have engines, and things that have engines or they move, like inserters, generally have pistons in them. The large machines have large copper frames, the small machines have small copper frames, and if it moves, it probably has a motor, but if it flies, it probably has the rotor unit instead. So there is a logic to how everything is set up. So the first thing we're going to want to make here is probably science packs. So let's do that, and we can do this anywhere. But since we have robots now, we can basically just kind of place them wherever we want. The general idea of our minibus is that we are going to have 2 input buses of resources, which will give us a total selection of 4 types of ingots. And that's as complicated as I would recommend you make your initial bus. Because if you go any more than that, it essentially turns into a main bus, and that's not really something you want to do here. And we're not going to use Hellmod for this. We're going to plan it with rate calculator. And the reason why we do that is because it's very physical, because we have all of these pipes, so every single inserter and every single machine needs to be connected by steam to get its energy, but also we have to actually physically make everything fit in here. And it's pretty neat. These aren't challenges that you normally run into, both with vanilla Factorio and other mods as well. So our goal is the copper pack, and that requires copper plates and tin gears, but we don't know how many of each type we need. For now, we'll just start making a few of these, and we can test it by just having the small steam assembler up here making the components that we need. So one of them would have to make copper plates, and then we would select both of them, and now you see that the intermediates is 0. It means that it is perfectly sized with how many copper plates we need. So that is a 1-to-1 ratio, and this is so much easier than doing it with Hellmod, that we just simply select it and we instantly know it's good. So that's all we need for plates, at least copper plates. Let's do this one with tin gears, and we can select those two, and you can see that we have a surplus of tin gears, which means this one assembler is plenty. And of course we can select both of them at the same time, but I would recommend against selecting everything all of the time. What happens if this recipe required tin gears and tin plates? And then if we had a second machine up here, which we are going to need, making tin plates, the tin plates that are made up here cannot make it to the machine down here, so the calculations would be a little weird. So I would just recommend kind of being careful with what you select, but you definitely get used to it real quick. But if we select these two, we can see that they are perfectly linked to each other, so it's a 1-to-1 ratio there. And we could always try to select everything, and we have no red numbers because we are perfectly supplying this machine. And we also have an idea of the ingredient input requirement. And if we are using yellow belts, and each half is going to have a different type of ingot on it, then it means we have 7.5 in total to work with. So how many of these assembling machines would we want? Well, we definitely want to do a lot of research, but we also don't want to have so many of them that they instantly use every ingot that's available, and then nothing will go down the line to the next machine. So we need to keep that in mind, but I'm thinking we'd want to have like 4 of them. But the other aspect of this is now we need to actually get the resources from up here into the machine, because theoretically we would have our input belt right here, and we're of course going to be using steam inserters, and a lot of them. Usually when designing this, I like to look at whatever the longest chain of machines is, and then work around that. So since making these gears is a 2-step process, that's going to be the bigger step. So we'll put an inserter there, and we can start using ghosts now because we have robots for this. And then we can put one up there to place it. However, this machine right here needs to have long-handed inserters. We could put it in the middle like this and have 2 long-handed inserters, or we can put it somewhere on the end and have a short-handed inserter on one side and a long-handed inserter on the other. Whatever you want to do. And here's another power of using the picker dollies, because we can instantly move stuff. And although we have robots now, so if we wanted to pick things up and move them, we can. Nonetheless, let's say we wanted to move all these items to the other side by using Shift and WASD for the selections on these. You can like really move things around quite quickly. And I guess I haven't talked about the disadvantage of WASD for this. And that the problem that you run into is if you want to hold Shift and move at the same time. So I'm holding Shift right now and using WASD. I can't move because that key has been used for the picker dollies. And it doesn't really come up that much, but the main place you would use that is if you're walking across a bunch of machines and you want to drag and slide a recipe. So let's say we had copper here, so I shift and right click, and you wanted to apply it to a bunch of machines in a row. While holding Shift and moving does nothing. So that functionality is lost. You still can do it, you just can't move while doing it. So if you stay stationary and hold Shift, then you absolutely can just drag your mouse around and change a bunch of machines. Luckily though, doing that isn't as relevant in IR3 because so many of the machines don't actually need a recipe to be set, that they will actually set their own recipe. So you find yourself not really doing that very often, but nonetheless, you do have to change it in your head because that is something you often do in Factorio that you just can't do when you have picker dolly set up in this way. Maybe there's a better way of setting it up. I haven't found it. I feel that Shift plus WASD is the easiest way to move things around quickly. And I'm trying to position these in such a way to where we have the minimum amount of steam pipes. So I've put them all on the right here. We have a short inserter there, and now we need to do one long-handed inserter to get it to cross this gap. Let's move that over so we can put our inserter in here, and it's just a long-handed inserter. And the pipes are mostly connected, but they would also need to be connected down the middle. So it's up to you on how you would want to hook all these pipes up. You can put these machines like right next to each other like this and have no spaces in between. That'll be as dense as possible. However, having some space in here is useful, especially you need to remember eventually you're going to have electricity. And when you do, you're going to need space for the power poles. So if you mash all these together where there's no space between them, then someday when you try to convert this to electricity, you're not going to have enough room. So knowing that, let's space things apart. So first, we want to copy this like this. And then we'll copy this so they are right next to each other. Copy that as well. Of course, the belt would go across. And we would have steam pipes going straight down the middle. So now, if we apply a steam to either side of one of these machines, it will also get distributed to every one of the inserters, and we don't have to fill up all these gaps here with just a pointless amount of pipes. So now we have a build, and we know exactly what we need to make. Of course, it's all quite big and expensive, but at least we have a list of items now, so we can just kind of go down the list, making exactly what we need. And grabbing more if we need them from our transfer plates. And since we are waiting on handcrafting again, this is an excellent opportunity to just pick up some more trees. It may seem like we are collecting a huge amount of wood, but wood is something we're going to need a lot of, and until we automate it, this is our only source. So it's actually not that big a deal to be picking all these up, because if we don't do it now, we probably were going to do it later. And there we go. Robots have cleaned up that part of the forest. Well, let's pick this up then, since we now have a build. And all this stuff's going to be cleared out eventually, so I don't think it really matters if we start it here. It doesn't look like it will run into any issues until we get to about down there. And I think that will be long enough for our minibus here. So let's get it started. So we can check the rate here by selecting both of these. It's going to make 0.313. And unfortunately, it looks like we have to do research to find out because, yeah, different packs require a different amount of time to research. That's actually something else I didn't do. I didn't check to see if the inserters would be fast enough. And in that case, if the inserters aren't fast enough to do one at a time, you might actually have to have more machines just placing items faster. But the standard inserter does move them at a rate of 1 per second. And this needs them at less than that, so just having the one machine was fine for this. But we might as well get some new research queued up. Well, doubling the speed of our inserters sounds pretty good. By adding a +1 to the non-stack. So seems fine, and we probably should start working on our military stuff, because sooner or later the biters are going to attack. They're going to need to deal with that. Researching the charcoal kiln is what's going to push us down the research tree. But for now, how about we get the scattergun turret, which is a shotgun turret, and how about stone walls? And I guess I didn't mention that, but we're using the shotgun for our weapon, and you don't have access to a pistol or an SMG. You have to start with the shotgun, and actually that makes a lot of sense, because a shotgun is basically the junk weapon of the game, that it's very inaccurate and difficult to use, so it kind of makes sense that that's the first one you should have. But anyway, we're doing research, and you can see that one of these barely uses any packs, so if we selected 4 of them, they would only use 0.067, and these two would make 0.313, so it's actually quite oversized. However, another thing to think about that's really cool about IR3 is that the progression of science packs makes a lot of sense. So our first research was 10, and as you go up, even though we're still in red packs, you'll see that they start requesting more, you know, and then we're at 50, and then we're working higher up, and now we're using the green packs, which are iron. You see there's 75, 125, 150, 175, 400, and then it's like 250, 400, 500, 700, 1,000, 1,100, 1,200, 1,300, and some of these late game ones gets real expensive, but you see how it kind of keeps moving upwards. So you definitely want to have some capacity for expansion in the future. So I'm thinking we can build 2 of these. It's kind of overpowered and it's a bit of handcrafting for the very beginning of the game, but we are also going to need to deliver these science packs. So let's use some ghosts. So at least they will have somewhere to go when they're ready. Put these down here, and also because we have the steam pipe here, we can push it further to get those connected. Man, this takes so long. Here, let's put them next to each other, because then we can kind of put these on here to make it look nice. But you definitely need to be careful early game with this handcrafting because it is obnoxious. You really want to minimize how much of this you're actually doing. Don't make it any harder on yourself than you have to. Okay, and we're going to need to have a long underground pipe, but I kind of want to craft that in the beginning of the queue here, because we need it right now. And you could just kind of pick anywhere to do this. If we connect it on this spot right here, it should connect everything, and the fluid flows a little bit, but it is connected now. It's a great mess of pipes in there, and we can easily get more resources from the transfer plates. If your mines were really far away, you could use those transfer plates to deliver the ingots to your initial minibus, wherever it is, and save yourself having to make all of these belts. And in this situation, it probably makes sense because we would have to send the items all the way from down there to up here, and that would take a little while. So we could get this started a little faster if we use some transfer plate logistics for this. So let's move this over so it encompasses everything. We probably don't need those big chests, so let's use the tin instead. So this top one will request the copper, the bottom one will request the tin. We need more steam inserters, since that steam is readily available here. And we need to make sure everything gets connected. So we'll just pipe it in like that. And now when we step on this plate, it is taking them from our inventory, even though we made those as request slots. And now they are being picked up and placed in the machines. And it makes those neat clunk noises as it's moving, but you see that it is running at full speed because it is a perfect ratio with the copper plate. And of course, we're going to run out of these ingots really fast if we don't pick up more. But not to worry, we are going to automate that with belts. It's just that would be a lot of belt handcrafting. As you see, just making these belts is taking forever. So I'd rather not sit here for 5 or 10 minutes just to make a belt go from here to there. And there they go. Automating research, but I guess we don't need to have this right there. And we'll probably fill up on these packs really fast, but at the same time, we don't necessarily want to research really fast. Because just like with Angel Bob's, and even Vanilla Factorio to an extent, you don't want to constantly keep researching. I know that's like the big recommendation, is never stop researching, but I disagree with that. Because if you're constantly researching, it's easy for you to research something and then forget that you researched it, and then you won't know what to do next. Because your crafting menu is filled with all these items that you have no idea what they do because you forgot what they were because you just researched them without thinking about it. So I'm very specific when I research things to only research things that I know I need and that I'm working on next. We actually have a lot of work in front of us, so we don't really need to worry about research too much because we need to automate as much as we can to avoid this enormous crafting queue. And you kind of need to decide what you want to automate. Certainly automating things like chests and belts and inserters is a good idea because you need so many of them. However, automating things like mining drills, you might want to think about if you want to do that because a huge amount of resources go into them and you just don't need them that often. The alternative is to automate the production of the components that go into it. So if we made large copper frames, basic engines, tin plates, and copper pistons, and then we requested those into our inventory, then it would only take 3 seconds to make, and next time we walked over a transfer plate near where those items are made, we would get new ones. So that's kind of how I'm looking at that. But for now, let's just automate things we immediately need, and we're certainly never going to handcraft transport belts. Even if we made all those items and had them in our inventory, we would still want to automate the belts. And at the same time, we would want to automate the undergrounds and the splitters as well. And since belts go into both of those, we'll probably want to have one machine in the middle, making belts, and then feeding into the other two machines. Much more handcrafting is now in front of us again. I guess it would save the maximum amount of time if the very first thing you automated was the production of those base components rather than making items. But the thing is, though, is that you might find yourself where you can do two things with one machine, where you can have a machine that makes transport belts, for example, but maybe that same machine could also supply you with, say, copper gears. It's probably not going to work that way in this situation, but it is something to keep in mind where just because that item isn't the intent of a build, you still potentially could get that out of there. And of course, we are immediately short on resources yet again. Probably should set these requests higher, but also at the same time, I don't think this is going to go on for very long, so it's probably fine. Plus, we're not in some major hurry to research a bunch of stuff, so I'm fine with it slowing down every once in a while. But prioritizing those belts makes sense just because one of the biggest issues we have right now is we have to deliver these ingots, even if they are delivered automatically by stepping on this plate. We still have to actually bring them here, and that is annoying. So it makes sense to automate the production of belts first here. Let's add in some new light. And we do need coal for this. So we're in an interesting situation where we need some amount of coal, but also we need to get rid of extras. So it's an example of think about it before you step on this plate, because we actually do want to have some amount of coal in our inventory right now. We don't necessarily always want to get rid of it. And it will happily remove the items from your inventory even if you have a request slot from here, if it is being requested by a particular chest. And we're actually starting to use up almost all of our copper. It didn't take very long, but we've just about cleared out our buffer of copper here. Okay, we have something we want to make. First, it's going to be the transport belts, and then we're going to feed those belts into these other machines. It is true that this one belt machine isn't really going to be able to supply itself, plus these other two machines at the same time, especially when you look at, like, the splitter needs 2 belts a second, whereas we can only make 2 belts a second. And the underground is going to require 5 belts a second. So instead of worrying about trying to feed these all properly, and because although we need a lot of belts, we don't need them that fast, that I think having one belt machine in the middle and then pulling off of it in order to make these others should work okay. So we look at what we need. We're going to need 3 items. Let's do the copper rod. So we place a machine here. We need copper rods, and those come from ingots. So let's check the speed, and it's plenty fast. So we need another one, making copper gears. We check that, and now we have an interesting limitation where it is too slow. So of course we can put another one there, making copper gears. And we select that, and now we're good. And you might think, okay, we've got all this covered, but we need to get the tin in there too. And we don't have the space for it. So here is where things get really interesting. Because these little assemblers are only 1x1s, it means we are quite limited on what we do with inserters. So if we move that up, and move this one up as well, now we have 2 slots right here, and they have been stacked on top of each other. Oh, so much crafting here. But if we use long-handed steam inserters, if we put it down here, it will grab the bottom machine, and if we put it up here, it'll grab the top machine. And that will cover those gears, but now these gears need their copper plates. And we can do the same thing, again, by having 2 spaces between them. Both of those making copper, and then having a long-handed here, which grabs from this bottom machine and puts it into this bottom machine, and then the long-handed on the top, which takes it from that top machine and places it into that top machine. And research is all done. Might as well keep going down the line of military stuff for now. We can make all of our weapons stronger, which seems good. And that's probably a good place to end the research for now, so we're not having to constantly fill that up. So that is a very long line there, but that will get all of the items across to where we need. However, it does also introduce a problem where we need to have 2 belts here with the same item because they have to pick up from both sides. But we can actually handle that either by having 2 belts going side by side, or we can use a splitter as well. But we'll figure that out at the end. We'll just leave these two belts there to remind us that they both need to be there. So it does create the interesting problem where this one machine here needs to supply copper rods, but it has all of this in front of itself that it has to go through. However, we could save some space because we also need to supply tin plates here as well. And we can kind of do the same thing with the layering. So this one makes the rods, this one can make the tin plates, and then if we select both of them, that is actually plenty fast. And then we can use the inserters to pick up from essentially what will have to be two belts, but then the one on the top will pick up ingots and turn them into plates for the tin, and the bottom one will pick up copper ingots and turn them into the copper rods, and then they will be placed in. And in doing so, that leaves us with one extra slot on the side, which then means we can make this last bit a lot simpler. This is the only two-step part of the process, so by doing that, we can shrink this thing way down, and now we have a size to work with here. It looks like we were placing the assembling machines as low as possible, so we can do that here as well. So we can now check our work by selecting everything, and you see that it is all positive or neutral, which means this is fast enough. So regular steam inserters there, and then long-handed to get into these ones. But that does actually kind of matter because the regular copper belt is going to be this bottom one, not the top one. Because if we move this up by one and try to put a long-handed inserter in there, it actually wouldn't fit because it would skip the gap. So these machines that are only one space big have some interesting limitations to them. And definitely there's some clever trickery you need to do with your inserters to make everything fit. And that's fine, that's part of the fun, I think, of this mod pack, so if you don't think it's fun, then I guess use Bob's adjustable inserters. So in doing so, it means that the copper also needs to be up here. But ultimately, if we select everything, that does get it covered, so now we need to do... And hey, there we go. I guess that's good enough for now. We've researched a lot of stuff. Now we need to handle the splitters and the undergrounds. How about let's put one over here for now, and we'll just see what the size ends up being. Let's do the splitters, since they're the easy one. So this is going to need both tin plates and gears, so we need to be careful about how we select them with Rate Calculator to make sure we are including the correct things. So when we're selecting tin plates, we need to make sure they are the ones going to this machine and not the ones going to the gears. So we put one gear machine in there, and we can already see a huge limitation on these, that we are going to need a ton of gear machines for this. And there we go, we have 4 of them now. And we select all of that, and it's just barely enough. And in fact, the maximum number of these that you can insert into one side of an assembler is 6 of them, because that's all the inserters will reach. So the fact that 4 of them worked was quite lucky, because now we need an additional 2 of them to insert the plates, and an additional 4 of them to get the plates into these assemblers. So first we'll check this tin plate, but it is not enough. We need 1 more of them. And there we go, so let's select everything. You can see how it now says we don't have enough tin plates, but that is because it is including the tin plates from these gears. So you have to be careful about what you select. So if we select only the tin plates, we know that is enough for the assembler on the bottom. So then if we only select the gears, we know that is enough. So now the thing we need to supply are the gears, and because the inserters can only go from one machine to one machine, it means we're going to need a total of 4 of them. And they're going to need to be spaced out with lots and lots of long-handed inserters in here. So much handcrafting. It'll slow down in a bit once we have some of these things automated, but we're not going to be automating these things right now. But it doesn't take very long for those 200 ingots to just instantly get consumed, so we couldn't really do much with this bus if we didn't have it hooked up with belts first. So now if we select just the gears and the plates supplying them, we can see that it is plenty fast. So short of supplying the belts into this machine, it should be good now. And it is going to be unavoidably longer than the other one, because we're going to have those 2 belts going up there. But also we're going to need to make the tin plates that just skip by everything. And doing that, we potentially could do easier, where we put all this here, and then have 2 inserters ejecting them out, because each machine actually doesn't make them that fast. And then we can use a belt to cover the rest of the way, and a standard short inserter to get them into the machine. Now we have an idea of size and shape, so we're going to want to get all these lined up, but we can do that at the end once we have figured everything out. Because now we need to make the undergrounds, where this is simply lots of transport belts and tin plates. So how many tin plates? Well, we'll start with one machine, see what it looks like, and you can see that we're going to need way more than that. Basically 4 of them. Yep, pretty much. And it would look like this with all of the long-handed inserters, and you would have to have 2 belts worth of items. And you can see that each one of these setups essentially requires this. But now that we have the idea of the general shape, we can try to make it work. We'll want to leave a space in the middle for the pipes, and this one just so happened to line up perfectly. So we'll do that. However, the other one does not. It needs to be spaced down here. So we'll do that. We can fill in these middle gaps with pipes, which should get everything connected in the end. However, there are some other considerations we need to do because we have to get all of these transport belts split between these various machines. And we can do that with pallets because we want to have some of these in buffers, but not a lot of them. And also, if we put the inserter right in the middle, then there would be no buffer at all. And because this machine requires, we can select them to see, so many more belts than we can create, that if we have a buffer of pallets, that should help smooth out production. So if we do something like this and have inserters going between them with some pipes there, that will create a little chain of resources. And we could do it on this side, but luckily it's a lot simpler because of the way the machines are spaced. And because there's a gap right there, we might as well just fill it in with a pipe. And that should mostly do it. We still need to figure out exactly how we're going to handle these belts. But we can do that once it's actually placed, and we can see where the inserters are actually trying to grab, and then make it fit there. But otherwise, that seems pretty good, and this is pretty representative of builds in IR3, where they tend to be quite dense with all these tiny machines, and at least when you're in the Copper Age or the Age of Steam, where you have all of these steam pipes everywhere, making it even more complex. But that basically does everything we need for belts, so now it's just looking at what are we short on, and making all of those items. So far these 4 furnaces have been supplying us with what we need, so it hasn't been too bad yet. Also, one other thing we need to do is get the items out of these machines, so we can put additional pallets nearby, and additional inserters as well, and fill in any gaps, at least to make the pipes look a little pretty. We do need to remember to leave gaps for power poles when that day finally comes. It is going to be a little while before we have power. And since this is basically built, we can now pick the entire thing up and place it back down. And let's leave a space in here for those eventual power poles. And we'll line it up with the bottom belts being the primary one, so it would be like this. And one thing you want to keep in mind when placing these is try to keep the bottom of it kind of flat. It doesn't have to be perfectly flat. However, when you're running by to do your drive-by logistics, it helps if all of the plates can be kind of in a straight line. And if your machines are like all the way down here and all the way up here, it doesn't let you do that. And they have a limited range on how far they could reach into your setups. So try to keep that in mind when you're placing these. We could always do this and then move the belt up and have it be a zigzag. I suppose that's actually more important than having it be completely straight belt, but then having less room to maneuver. So let's line it up with this machine right there. So that way our logistics are easier when we get to that point. I don't know though. The OCD part of me is like, no, 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 no. I don't care how bad it is. The belts must be straight. I can't help myself. Well, as far as the logistics, this still works fine. Because if we put it here, it would reach everything. It's just something you need to be aware of, that if the machines extend down too far, then doing your drive-by logistics can be quite annoying if you have to maneuver around obstacles. So it only really works if it's an easy path to either walk or drive. Well, that's good, I suppose. I guess the achievements have not been disabled because haven't found a need to use the console yet. So we need to get this pipe connected somewhere between these. We could just connect it right there, but sometimes it also looks better to just fill in the whole thing anyway. even though you don't really need to do that. But to make it a little easier to understand, how about let's leave a bit of it open here. We don't really need to walk in here that much, so not being able to walk through there isn't too big a deal. Almost got this placed here. It's been a little while of handcrafting, but after this we will no longer have to handcraft any belts, which will save us some amount of time, and then we'll go on from there until we're not handcrafting stuff anymore. Or at least the small stuff. There we go. The steam is finally connected, and you find out if you did it right. If everything got fuel, and it looks like we did do it right because everything has fuel. Let's put some more torches in here so we can see. And now we kind of have an idea of the belts, because we need to remember that we're going to have another belt that's going to be up here with other resources. So we need to keep that in mind when deciding how to split the resources in here. So one thing you can do, let's say if you only had one line of inserters like this, is you can just put one splitter in here in that one place, so both inserter hands had access to everything they needed. But in this situation, we need to have a lot of resources split apart, so we can put our first splitter here, which splits those across. And the underground length to start with is going to be 4. So if we took these out and have them be short-handed going into there, and then short-handed going into there, and then these ones on the bottom were the long-handed, then they would reach. So if we stopped that, then if there was a belt that was up here, it could actually skip over this. So we could put another splitter in here, and again, if there was a separate belt that was up here, it could skip over what's going on. That should be enough for us to see this in action, so hopefully it works. At least until the ingots run out. And it's going to be kind of a lot happening all at once here, but you just have to trust that you did it right. And we're definitely going to be inserter limited on that input side for now. So because of that, I'm actually going to remove the inserters that are picking up these belts, because the very first thing we need to do is get these belts lined up, and we can kind of move this down here because we're going to have a belt come through here. We still have this, but do we actually need to have it? Well, we are doing a lot of handcrafting, but we don't need to have all 4 of these inserting onto pallets. We could just have them put it onto a belt, and then we can pick up the items as they get closer to here if we actually want to manually pick up any ingots, because we do need to get fuel in here, and getting steam in here is a little annoying because not much of this is running on steam. So we don't really need to do that. So for now, let's just run the ingots up. And of course, out of belts. Probably going to have to move these belts soon when we need more production, but for now, look at that. We already have 122 belts. So suddenly, doing this is much easier. And for now, we're just trying to get a functional factory, so it doesn't have to be super optimized at this point. So we have a belt coming up here, going in there. Jumps over, which means we don't need any of this anymore. Of course, the alignment of the ingots is backwards, but they don't really have to be on the top or the bottom specifically for this. It'll work fine either way. So let's just pick those up so it can go straight in. So there we go, automated ingot delivery. And we'll definitely want that because we will be producing a lot of items. Looking good, so we can probably hook these back in and allow it to operate normally. And these trees are probably a bit in the way, so let's get rid of more of them. Because now we need our transfer plate. We probably want to position this plate as far out here as we can get away with, just to hit the maximum number of machines and also have the most flexibility. So how about we place this plate down here for now, which should have the maximum amount of flexibility for any future builds. And we might as well get started making some requests. Our inventory is almost full now, but that's what happens. And doesn't really matter the order we put these in here. We just want to get them in there so they're included. because this is in range, it's now going to start grabbing what is available. Running out of steam, but we can always grab more. And that's the end of this episode. On the next one, we're going to expand our automation to include intermediates such as pistons and motors. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.